Well, yeah, thanks a lot, Gabe, for graciously offering to let me join Civic Tech. I've been to a meeting 5 years or so ago, and I actually found it really rewarding, got exposed to a really cool idea then. So I'm glad to be back, and apologies for the hiatus. Um, and Yeah, James, that take on not global warming, on daylight savings, I think it's a bit more controversial than what you said, but I appreciate that. I'm here in a basement in Toronto with broken lights, so if I look like I've rubbed phosphorescent makeup on my face, that's why my webcam's desperately trying to low light level balance my face. So anyway, that is my introduction. I'm really excited about this idea. It's pretty early stages, but it's been something I've been thinking about for almost a year, and it's about time to share it with more people. And one of my major goals for tonight is to get some feedback, get this on the radar of people who might have a bit more experience taking these projects further. So I'll step into it, and yeah, let's jump in. So we're going to start with a gratuitous baby photo. If you saw the meetup, this is the photo I used, and my excuse is that my daughter was part of the inspiration here for the idea. And yeah, so let's talk about like how that idea started. It was October last year, sitting in the front porch of my house. I'm in like the beaches area near Kingston Road, and it was a beautiful morning. My daughter's asleep. I think she was 5, 6 months by then. Cold, beautiful morning. Sun's kind of peeking through some trees. Birds are chirping. And it's a neighborhood with lots of kids and families, so it's just a great place to spend a little bit of time outside. My neighborhood has, of course, also lots and lots of streets, and my specific street has a stoplight right at the top of the hill. We're on a pretty steep hill. If you're a geography nerd, you can probably figure out where I live from that, but let's stay focused here. So I was sitting there and I was on Twitter, as we often are, perusing it, and I came across some pretty terrible, sad news about the day before, a young woman in Scarborough being struck and killed at an intersection walking home from school. And I won't go into detail about her, but I was reading about it, and it was just utterly shocking that this would happen in our neighborhood, and the impact on that person. And then you look up Toronto stats on people who are hit by cars, and the ones that don't make it, there's 60 or so a year, with a bit of a dip during COVID. And so it was just very clear to me, sitting in this peaceful place, as cars sped up my hill, just raced up the hill to make the light at the top, that this could happen anywhere, and it could happen to anyone. And in true new father spirit, I kind of was gripped by this idea that maybe I should try to do something about it. So what did I do? We'll get to that. So the question I've been grappling with is the city of Toronto doing everything it can to protect its most vulnerable residents? And the day that young woman was killed by a driver, a lot of police showed up. They scoped out the scene. They filed a report. Politicians came. They said exactly what you'd expect, and really not much happened, because from my perspective, not a lot's happening from the city to protect its citizens. So the street design at that intersection is essentially unchanged almost a year later. The database where you can actually see where people are getting struck and injured and killed by cars in Toronto does not show this incident because it's not updated, it's not live. Generally in Toronto, 2022 looks like it's on track to be as deadly as ever. And I guess my question to everyone is, do you feel safe always biking and walking in your community? Because I know I love my community, but I don't. So the idea here is, we as citizens, I think it's time where, the normal channels are not really functioning. We can maybe step up, and my idea uses a little bit of Raspberry Pi, some open source software, to tackle that. So let's talk about what is available today in terms of speeding data, because I guess kind of the issue I see out my front door, and I'm sure some of you see it walking around the neighborhood in a lot of different situations, is there are a lot of people who speed. And if you read a bit of the news, you know that enforcement of speeding has really stopped. If you follow any like city planners, you might see that Toronto's not really designed well to be safe for pedestrians and bicyclists. So there's a long road for us to improve. And there's no one really gathering data as far as I can see. And feel free if you know something, throw it in the chat. I'd love to know about it. But there's no one really gathering good data to tackle this problem. So there's I think it's called the Automated Speed Enforcement Program. The city bought 50 devices for the entire city to measure people's speed, and it actually also takes a photo and gives out tickets, which is fantastic. And if you've read some of the news stories it's generated, they give out thousands of tickets in each location. Then there is, and I'll talk a little bit more about that data. Then there's also some TPS data where they hone in on speeding, but really it's only when there's a major collision and speeding is a factor in that collision. So every time that, you know, I'm a driver, I love driving, I bike, I walk, but I also drive, and every once in a while I will find myself speeding. All these everyday occurrences are not measured by anyone from what I can tell. So if you're looking for more data, that's about it. So talking more about those speed traps that, you know, it's a hot button issue, but in terms of using that data to understand where speeding is happening in our city and why, it's really insufficient. So we only have 50 of these. They're only in place for what's claimed to be 6 months, but if you look at the data, it's really only 5 months because it takes time to move these things around. There's a lot of bias issues because they tell everyone where they will be. They put up signs, so it's not like a natural experiment in any way. And if you just look at the data, you know, I wrote "Good luck researchers and general public trying to make sense of this data." It's super wacky. So there's not much that can be gleaned from this information. The TPS speeding data, this is 14 years. So, you know, speeding is an everyday problem. It's not a few different pinpricks on a map over 14 years. So, you know, it's pretty useless data. So, you know, they're not trying to tackle this problem per se, but this is what we're working with. Gabe, I don't know if you do any questions. I guess this is a recorded presentation, but if there's anyone who is dying to ask a question, I'd be open to.
We'll do questions at the end if that's okay.
Fantastic. So I have a feeling in my gut that speeding is a problem. I have a feeling that probably for many of you it is. And we have a lot of information here about people who are hurt and killed by speeding cars. It's not just about the people who get hurt, though. When people speed in a city, in a dense city, it causes a lot of pollution. Pollution can inhibit the brain development of young children. It can cause higher rates of cancer. I know there are some civic tech Toronto people who are looking into measuring noise, and it causes a lot more noise. Just overall, it makes our outdoor environments really oppressive and unpleasant places to be, which keeps people from going out and spending more time outside, which again, we know has a lot of health issues. So in one sense, speeding is a symptom of a much bigger problem around how we design our cities and our society around cars. And you know, if you're at all interested in freeing us from that or making progress in that, we probably need some information about speeding. So how do we get some better data? So, and why? What's the value of that? So beyond the fact that collecting data is super fun, having granular, broad-based data for the city over a long period of time, that should be something that we can use to help make our communities safer. So first off, being able to actually define the scale and the scope. Like I said, the data before is very incomplete. If we can at least just measure this problem somehow, and then if we have proof of that problem, if we can export some data and some snippets so that we can go to decision makers or go to people in the community and say, if you feel like your neighborhood is unsafe, you're right, and here's why, and here's data on it, and maybe a visualization. Data on this can help us keep our politicians accountable, right? It's easy to say you're going to do something and throw a speed bump down, or put a, a camera in a school zone to give some tickets, but is it actually moving the needle for people? There's no data on it, and we can't hold anyone accountable without it. And some good data would actually allow us to make some actionable, detailed requests from policymakers. So maybe we need to take them all the way there, where we say in this specific neighborhood, or we have a list of areas of the city that require special attention, and we're going to tell you exactly what you need to do to the road to make it safe, right? So in a nutshell here, without this data, we're just going to continue to be in the dark about this really dangerous phenomenon with no clear path out of the woods. So let's change that. So what did I do when I had this, this idea that, hey, maybe there's something that can be done about it? Started Googling, and what I found looking for a speed camera that I might be able to put up at my house is some really, really cool tech that was really, really, really expensive. These are tens of thousands of dollars. They're built for homeowners associations to basically track all of their people driving around their neighborhoods. And then, that's at one end of the scale. The other end is really cheap IPTV cameras, which really don't have any interface way of extracting data. So there's nothing in the middle. At least that's what I found when I first went looking for kind of a commercial item here. So enter Claude Pajot. This guy is amazing. Claude was a senior IT analyst at Bruce Power National Development Site. He retired in 2006, but he's not been resting on his laurels. And he built an open source program using Python, published it on GitHub, and it's been almost a decade he's been working on this, refining it over the years. He has a lot of people contributing to the project. For those of you familiar with open source, that's pretty common. If you're not, this is a great opportunity to take a pretty mature software package and start using it in the real world. One other side note about Claude, and the reason I put his face up here and I say he's a great dude, his YouTube, where he has tutorials about how to use the software. He also has, this past winter, he built a snow park in his backyard, and he has some snowboarding photos or videos in his backyard, which I think is amazing. So like I said, it's a pretty mature package. Here's a list of everything. I won't really go into this, but I just kind of want to throw it up there on the screen. In a nutshell, though, what it does is allows you to take Raspberry Pi, which is a very common, very low cost computer. Essentially, if you were to make the simplest, cheapest computer you can build, and he's built software to run on that with a camera module, so you can get live video. And what it'll do is it'll give you video from out in front of your house, and there's a bit of configuration. Put a car that you know the length of in front of it, match it against these bars on the screen, and boom, you're measuring speed. For those software interested folks, there's some machine learning. He uses opencv, I believe, to do some motion tracking. As I dug deeper, I found that there's this great guy, Adam Balsam in Boston, who took Claude's package, bought the Raspberry Pi, and set it up on his street. And he's a data guy. So I'm using his data, his photos, because he's made it nice and clean. But this was, if I'm remembering correctly, 1 week in Boston on his street. And so there's some really interesting ways you can graph it. You can see the outliers. And I loved his comment here. Number of speeding tickets issued during this period, 0. Revenue lost based on his speeding numbers, $111,850. So there's kind of a gap between the laws we have, the expectations of how public space is used, and the reality when you actually have a way to measure it. So what are the implications of what these folks have done? First off, there's now free, flexible software that you can customize and use. And it's, in a sense, supported and is living, breathing software that we can take advantage of. Secondly, the program that Claude made uses a cloud database. So you can send data to a centralized database. This allows you to actually have many devices contributing to one project. And thirdly, of course, I mentioned it before, Raspberry Pi. It's a low cost, ubiquitous hardware. And I'm looking for some Raspberry Pi enthusiasts who know it a lot better than me, but I believe an MVP with a bare bones Raspberry Pi could build a speed camera device for under $50. So I did it, and I thought it would be really hard. And I'm not an engineer. I've worked in software for the last 10 years. I'm not an engineer though, and I was able to do it. I was able to measure the speed of my daughter running around in my basement. So I figure if I can do it, we can probably make this pretty standardized and easy to set up for just about anyone. So I'm getting to the point here where it's more, a thought experiment. The value of having this data in front of your house is really cool. You can show your friends. You might, if you run into your city councilor, you might say, hey, I have a speeding issue on my street and I have data to prove it. But what we really need is to have more people get hands-on with the tech. So I'll do what they don't want you to do on presentations, but I'm going to read off these slides. But short term is to get a few more deployments out there. So maybe 10, maybe 50 of the Raspberry Pi running the software. Give us a chance to generate some buzz, get people excited, get the juices flowing a bit, test out the concept. Build a team of people who are interested in making this easy to use and available to people. And of course, work out some bugs. Medium term, I don't see any reason why we can't scale this out to over 1,000 devices if we can get the price to the right point. So it's not a big investment and it's easy to use and a compelling project for people to be a part of. I think in the medium term as well, we could probably make this a project that other cities could take advantage of. I know Toronto's not the only place where we have speeders. I think we could enlist some data scientists to do some really cool stuff with the data, even in the early phases here, overlay it on maps, and so on. It's going to be a treasure trove of geolocated data for researchers. And then we want to start teaming up with some experts in road design. If you're not too familiar with speeding, there's a lot of talk about enforcement, but on a very high level, enforcement can only do so much, and there's a lot that can be done around actual road design to kind of gently nudge people to just drive in a more appropriate way on the streets they're driving on. So teaming up with some experts on that and using the data would be a very powerful way to get some policy change. And then the idea would be we would uncover some issues in some areas, and we could do some advocacy in those areas with those communities and say, hey, we have some information here that about this problem you're experiencing. Here's a way that you can use it to go and pressure your city councilor to get some progress on it. Long term, this is more pie in the sky. Feel free to think what you think about it, but this is the way I think, so I wanted to share it, and maybe some of it's on point. But yeah, something like this could be used to identify extreme offenders. So if you have someone who is repeatedly speeding on a street in a very dangerous fashion, you may be able to identify the make and model of that car and start to hone in on who that might be if they really require some sort of intervention. Or if there's a very extreme case, someone driving 100 kilometers over the speed limit, stunt driving, this could be used to identify when that's happening and what types of cars are doing it. We could integrate this with any like noise pollution, noise reduction focused projects, remix the data together. That might be interesting. And yeah, like over the months and the years, we should, if you're running a business, when you make a change to how you do things, you always measure the impact of that change. So this might be a way to actually say, okay, well, we threw a roundabout in instead of a stoplight or a stop sign. Did it actually cause people to slow down a bit? Right now, that data is, there's some of it out there, but this might be a really powerful way to help city planners. this could also be just a citywide tool for policy on driving laws. And then the other idea too is I think this would be phenomenal for young people. I'm not sure what age exactly to take on as a project with their parents or in school groups to actually learn how to program Python, set up Docker, to use a Raspberry Pi, and to learn a bit about civics at the same time. So that's kind of what I'm thinking. And then I threw it onto a little bit of a very simple timeline. I would love to kind of get cracking on this pretty soon. Find some like-minded people this month to start really honing in on some hardware and software specs for a beta, and then launch in the next couple of months. 10 to 100 testers. Who knows what the right number is? And then over the months, take those results, analyze them, consolidate them, and maybe sometime Q1, Q2 next year, launch much more broadly to the wider public. Again, I'm just kind of thinking it through. That it's in flux. So I've identified some of the specific skills we need from the community. Perhaps if you're on this call, you might have some of these skills or interests. So definitely Raspberry Pi. I can get it working, but I think we really need some experts on Raspberry Pi to figure out the sweet spot of the least expensive tech we can use. There's different configurations of the hardware to actually run the software. Python, Docker, there will be some customization we'll need for this project. Experience with cloud databases. SQLite is what Claude software uses right now, but there are options to use some other database technologies. If you're interested in machine learning, opencv is what Claude uses. There may be some other optimizations there. Project management, of course, road design policy. And if this does scale out, definitely some marketing and advocacy. How do we communicate this the right way to people and make sure it grows? So that's, I have no idea how I'm doing for time, Gabe. I hope I'm not way over, but that's in a nutshell what I wanted to share with everyone.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. Please join me in a virtual round of applause for David.